With machine learning technology, are the machines really learning? What about AI agents? Can they really make complex decisions on their own? Suffice to say, we're entering a new age with modern artificial intelligence, and the answers will need to be forthcoming. Find out more on this episode of Future Proof.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
We're going to talk about the hottest topic. It's machine learning. The machines are learning. They are kind of learning, which is kind of freaky. So the models are learning, I guess. It's not really the machines that are learning, it's the models that are learning, right? They're learning behavioral patterns, they're acting on things, and that's kind of what I want to dive into today is these AI agents, otherwise known as agentic AI. It was called interactive AI when the year began, and a few weeks later it became agentic AI. So now everyone's talking about AI agents. Salesforce just had their big Agent Force announcement, which was pretty interesting. It does look pretty good. These agents can do some interesting things. My big question to all of our guests today is how are we going to manage these little critters? How are we going to monitor these things? Is it log files and then agents managing log files and the orchestration of these things? It's going to be pretty interesting. Salesforce said that I guess Atlas is their reasoning engine, and Atlas is the orchestrator, I suppose, of all the agents that do various things. And what I've heard is that typically you want the agents to do one specific thing and do it very, very well. Learn to do it well, and then pass on to another agent when that task is done, which is kind of how humans work in the real world. But let's go around the room and introduce ourselves and give your opening statement or argument, and we'll go from there. Samuel Holzman, I'll throw it over to you first. Managing the machines, what do we do next?
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. And I want to take your audience back to April 4th, 2017. April 4th, 2017. Somebody that most of you probably know, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, invented the web. It wasn't somebody else, but it was Tim Berners-Lee. And he said, I'm reading off my script here, a tipping point could be reached where people realize the data belongs to me. And that's where we're at right now. And so when it comes to these AI agents, I want to remind everybody that an application, a system, is made up of four components. The procedure division, which is really where that agent engine really does well. The person-machine interface division, not sure about that one. The machine-to-machine interface division, that one's pretty good. And then the last one is the data division. And that's where, if I can be blunt, we, the community, has a real problem. And we know that because of the phrases that we're hearing, model collapse, hallucinations, and all these other things. So with all this enthusiasm, I want to mention that the key thing is data. So within this activity here, I believe that what we're going to be doing is using these marvelous technologies with, quote, our own data rather than these large language models. And that's where the real best practices in learning comes into play.
Yeah, good opening statement. Let's go around the room here. Jim Stern from Targeting. Tell us about yourself real quick and what you think is happening. How are we going to manage the machines?
We are going to use the machines to manage the machines. My introduction is for the last 23 years, I've been running the Marketing Analytics Summit conference. That because the website experience was so bad, I said, look, let's measure what you're doing. That led to predictive analytics and machine learning. A book behind me, Artificial Intelligence for Marketing, was from 2017 because it was machine learning. AI now means generative AI. So I have strong opinions on that I'll be happy to share at the drop of a hat.
Well, share your first one, then we'll go around the rest of the room. What's your first strong opinion about?
First strong opinion is that we're using it wrong. We're complaining about these generative AI systems as not being able to, how many R's are there in the word strawberry? That's wearing roller skates to the bowling rink. It's not a good idea. But if you lean into the hallucinations, to the fact that it's a creativity machine, that's a whole different ballgame and something that is the new horizon that we haven't yet delved into, to quote
Yeah,
ChatGPT.
that's right. That's his favorite word. I used that just today. I joked that if you see the word delve, it's like, that's probably from ChatGPT. It loves to delve. And next we have Joe Gasca from Grax, who's been on the show a few times over the years. And Joe, of course, you work in the Salesforce arena as backup for Salesforce. You got a lot of cool technology to do that. And I remember saving files in Parquet format to enable analytics. You've done a lot of clever things over the years. And Salesforce, so Agentforce, Atlas is going to be the orchestrator. It looks like it's doing some pretty good things, but what are your thoughts on what's happening now and how are we going to manage the machines?
Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, Joe Gasca, Crack's CEO and founder, and we are definitely in the Salesforce ecosystem, and it's great to see the market moving as fast as it is. One of the biggest things that we've always found in kind of working and how it's evolving very quickly is historical data is really the training set for what we're driving a lot of these actions on, whether it's autonomous or agents or business processes. It comes down to basically almost signal processing, right? So what are the signals? What are the pieces that are feeding in? We're all about collecting the highest fidelity and the highest frequency of Salesforce data, capturing it, storing it securely in a customer's cloud. And really now people are really looking at driving autonomy, or what's the next best action, right? Whether it be through lead scoring, lead velocity, opportunity scoring, opportunity velocity, CSAT scores, the deviation, what is the next best action? We're seeing a lot of people really looking at what is not the action, but what's the data being fed in, and how do I make the proper predictions, and what are the data? It's all coming down, like Sam said, to the data, right? The data itself. You can get a lot of technology, bad data in, bad data out, but if you don't have
Yeah.
enough history to do the predictions and kind of the actions, that's really where we're seeing the biggest growth right now, by far.
Yeah, and that resonates with what Sam was talking about too. Well, Hyun Park, Amalgam Insights, you're an industry analyst. You track all this stuff, and you're traveling constantly. You must have a lot of miles on your plan, so you got
Yes,
some vacations planned, I'm sure. But
absolutely.
what do you see happening? I mean, you're one of the smarter guys I know. How are we going to manage the machines?
First of all, Eric, sorry that that's the case for you. I hope you meet many smarter people. Luckily, we've got some other smart people in the room with us right now. But I've been looking at AI, on and off for about 25 years. I started in computational chemistry, where we looked at multivariate optimizations for protein folding. It ends up a lot of this math ended up being useful for personalization at the end of the day, as we tried to figure out how you get thousands of signals and turn them into the right thing for the right person at the right time. So I just happened to learn the math early enough in my career to be able to use that for the rest of my life. Just a lucky guess there. But since I've been looking at this, we've gone from that optimization to looking at predictive analytics, machine learning, modeling, and now we have these more generative AI and transformer-based approaches. And as we've gone through all of that, I feel like the one big mistake we make is always thinking that we are making these evolutionary steps towards pure automation, whereas I think, like Jim said, we're actually moving towards different types of computing usage. One of the things that I throw out most often is that I think the biggest mistake people talk about in AI is the idea of eliminating bias. I think that's an awful phrase. Anybody who knows the math knows it's impossible to eliminate bias. And what you are really trying to do is confirm biases, document biases, and make that a part of your thinking process going forward. And I'm sure I see Jim, you nodding like this is actually a big problem, because the more we try to eliminate bias and try to get to a single truth, the more difficult it will be for us to use Gen AI. So I'm just tossing that out there. There's a whole lot of other things we can talk about, agents, ROI projects, but let's get into this.
Yeah, well, Jim, why don't you comment on that? Because I think that's what you're talking about when you talk about leaning into the hallucinations, right?
So a couple of things. First of all, bias in the data, it exists. It's true. It is the nature of nature, if you will. And you can't get rid of it. The only way to get rid of bias is if the machine agrees with everything you say. And then it's not biased. So we have to imbue these systems with values. And then the question is, okay, well, whose values? We're humans. Everybody has different values. Every culture, every city Every country has different values. And so identifying the biases so that you can account for them is that's what I was nodding in agreement with, because it's the getting rid of bias is hopeless. It's not forget mathematically, it's not humanly possible.
Right.
So acknowledging them and recognizing where the output is biased is where the value is going to be.
That's pretty interesting. That's an interesting take. Sam Holzman, I'll throw you into the mix on that one. I do fully appreciate what these gentlemen are saying. There is going to be there are different kinds of bias, of course, but there's going to be some leaning in some direction or other. That doesn't mean it's a bad algorithm, for example. It could be. It could be just it's a sloppy algorithm. But, what do you think about this concept of appropriate use of the technologies and appropriate guardrails?
Well, this is where we get into what we call EAI. I'm not trying to throw fancy new terms out there. Enterprise Amalgamated Information. Sorry, guys. And that's because I don't think that remember what the A stands for?
Artificial, yeah.
Which means phony. Okay. So what we believe is this powerful engine, tremendous engine. And as Jim mentioned, also, there's going to be bias. Well, we want enterprise bias to be worked on rather than trying to sort out the nonsense that's out there and trying to filter out, well, is this true or is that true? Is this true? Is that true? So we're trying to bring this in-house. And I also want to mention that in this world of data that we're talking about, there's 4 types of data that these engines are being trained on. One is the internet data. Of course, we all know that. I like to call it data sludge. That's what I call it. It's unfortunate, but it gets the point across. The next is evildoer data, copyrighted data that is being used illegally. Of course, this drives me nuts, probably drives a lot of people crazy because they're stealing from all of us. Now, even with that, there's a third and fourth category. The third is what I call balanced information and exchange. In other words, to get on this webinar, you ask for an email. You ask for an email. The only way that people get onto this webinar is if they give you an honest email. It's a balanced exchange of information. There's a value. The fourth one, notice I'm smiling here, is best practices. And everyone needs to recognize nobody is going to put their best practices on the general internet because that costs money. So what we want to do is to leverage these tremendous engines that we're having. And we know that even with us, there's bias, in other words, internally, but we're going to leverage that because we know where that data is coming from. Pretty exciting times when we get past the hype.
Yeah, no, that's a real good point. And maybe Jim, I'll throw this back over to you because you're in this industry and you're trying to improve results for folks, target marketing, for example, personalization, knowing whom to send an email to. I mean, I've been doing email marketing for 24 years now. It's longer than most people. And it's gotten significantly harder, especially in the last year or two. I've noticed significant changes in behavior for email marketing. It's probably because of social media. It's also because the big engines like Gmail and Yahoo are trying to tamp down on spam and things of this nature. And they're doing so in relatively clumsy ways in some senses. But I think that Sam made a couple good points there. What do you think about this balanced information and best practices?
The balance of information flow is the fair exchange of value, which is the solution to privacy. You can't have any information about me unless you offer me something in return. So Amazon was the first one to say, hey, give us your email address and tell us who your favorite authors are. And it's like, oh, great. So you can spam me. In exchange, we'll tell you when your favorite author is about to have a book released. You will be the first on your block to know, and we'll give you a discount for buying it in advance. And you'll be one of the first people to get it on the planet. That's a service. That's not spam. That's something I want. At the same time, the Bank of America said, fill out this form and we'll send you our newsletter. And the form included household income and age and education and how many children and how many cars. It's like, that's not a fair exchange of information. I don't want your newsletter. Thank you. No. So the balance of exchange of information is crucial. It also is going to ensure that the data that we receive as companies is as good as can be. Because if you look at your email database, you'll see there's a lot of Daffy Ducks and Mickey Mouses.
Right. Yeah, I've looked at that data. I see because I check all these shows and I see people whose phone numbers are 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9. I'm
Yeah,
like,
that's my
oh, that's
number.
interesting. The 234 area code. Yes, I'm very familiar with that. And a very, very clever marketing too. Dial 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 now. Call now. It's good stuff. But maybe Hayan, I'll throw it over to you on the ethical concerns here. Jim and Sam both make good points. Ethically, if you're doing something as a service and you are considering the customer, people talk about being customer centric and all this stuff, just being a decent human being, doing unto others as you would have them do unto you, that's basic business practice. And I think it really does come into play with using AI, using personalization, and having checkpoints along the way to make sure you're doing the right thing. What do you think, Hayan?
Yeah, so ethics is always a very tricky area because you've got a combination of data where I'm really chomping at the bit to hear Joe's perspective on this, actually, where data is going to be an important aspect of how honest your data, how trusted is the data, how protected is the data. You're going to have the logic where we fundamentally have these two different ways of purchasing things. One is a more call it B2C concept, where we create ideas of things like luxury and trust and branded associations that are more, I guess, personal in nature. And then there's this more B2B aspect of purchasing that is more of a strict value exchange. And both those branded experiences and those value experiences are important as part of that ethical concern. We have to make these considerations of what are we actually getting and how much do each of these areas of perception and then quantitative value, how much do each of those matter to me at the end of the day, and how much of that should be part of this ethical behavior or these transactions that come into play. So all of that comes into that thought process every time we are thinking about AI. And frankly, a lot of that is hard to compute or code or create from a workflow based perspective.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point because I've gone back and forth for years in terms of personalization and marketing and how do you get smaller and smaller lists, but at a certain point, it's the law of diminishing returns. And you're like, am I really getting anywhere? It's a very difficult thing to manage, and it continues to be difficult. I think one of the cool things about machine learning in general is that it can auto classify and auto categorize and do some of these things for us to help us along the way. And that's the ethics of the data that you're using. I mean, what you folks have done at Grax is to focus on allowing companies to store their transactional data, their historical data, such that they can use it later on to do machine learning and to do personalization and things of this nature. And so you've, out of the box, expressed some respect for ownership of the data. And of course, these models, large language models, have been trained on data at large, basically. But what are your thoughts about the ethics of that data being used and for what purpose? And of course, that's kind of what GDPR was all about. But what do you think, Joe?
Well, this is a huge topic, but I mean, if you get into not only ethics, but data privacy and compartmentalization of the data in respect to who you're giving a personalized answer to or recommendations to. If you think of almost people using and engaging with your product that are paying customers and people that are in the public that are engaging, how do they engage with your business? You have specific knowledge about how they're using your product and how they're engaging with your business, which will impact how you're going to answer a question, whether it's personalized with their question, recommended on their behavior and their actions. So, for example, if someone's using your product and they file a case, and you can index what the sentiment is to that case, you can give a personalized answer to affect their customer satisfaction score. That's very private and sensitive data, where it's not a public answer or a public algorithm that has access to that data itself. So we're seeing a massive division between how people are building their algorithms and approaches to intelligence from both a public segment of their business as well as their private side of their business. So when they're driving these agents, the most critical piece that we're seeing the largest growth, they're seeing how do people impact their customer satisfaction score internally and be more personalized with how they're addressing and when they're addressing. So if they're using their product more, or they have more cases, or they have a negative sentiment with your support team, how do you engage and drive your customer satisfaction score, increase it up? And that's really where it comes down with historical data, and how do you consume that historical data itself to drive more intelligent decisions? And there's a wealth of technologies out there. It used to start with analyzing analytics and looking at trends and trying to respect that. Now they're trying to go more autonomous, saying, here's a recommended action that we can take with our support team based on all of our history with our clients as a whole, and then based on just this client. So if you look at segmentation and compartmentalizing the data, not only at the business level, but at the customer level itself, how do you answer that? And how do you actually be more successful in driving that engagement? So we're definitely seeing multiple layers of people using their history to give more personalized answers, as you guys have said. But it has to be very specific in context to what they're doing. So we're seeing this across the board. The biggest spend right now that we're seeing is people really driving the internal engagement, the real private side of their business. The whole public side of how do we drive the conversion rate and how do we engage with the prospects to really convert them into paying customers. We're really seeing a division of labor and a division of this really wholeheartedly across the board. So, but the ethics piece, obviously massive. How do you use the data? Where do you use it? And how do you answer the questions, and making sure you don't cross-pollinate the data across the customers?
Yeah.
That's
Right.
that's the reason why we didn't build a multi-tenant we do kind of single tenant deployments, super private in the customer's cloud, but historical data. But it's something right now, it's coming up over and over and over. And how do you protect the segmentation of those two pieces that people are building up?
Yeah, it's very interesting stuff. And you have this wide range of policies from one company to the next about what can be done. Of course, here in the US, it's pretty much still the wild, wild west. You could do most anything. It's starting to change. And maybe, Jim, I'll throw it over to you for comments, and then Hayan after that. Jim, the problem with constraints in this domain is that they do wind up hindering innovation, at least to a certain extent. The problem with no constraints is that all bets are off. How can we find, and to Joe's point, within companies, how can we define policies that will respect the privacy of our customers and even our prospects, for example, while still leveraging the power of this AI technology? What do you think, Jim?
Well, let's see. It depends on where you are corporate culture wise and where you live within the uncanny valley. So if I go to Amazon and it says, "Hi Jim, welcome back," I expect that. That's normal. Here's everything you've purchased from us since 1995. Thank you. When we first did personalization, we as a technology, it was AT&T who answered the phone, "Hi, Mr. Stern, how can I help you?" And everybody freaked out. It's like, "Where's the camera? Who knew you? How did you know it was me?" And they learned to say, "Hi, it's AT&T. How can I help you?" "Oh, my name is," "Yes, I have your account in front of me," which they did as the phone was ringing. They just didn't tell me that, so they didn't freak me out. So on the one hand, are you using the information for me as a customer or about me as a prospect? And if you're using it for me, that's great. It's a service. Even before you know who I am, we're getting hyper personalization now with machine learning and dynamic content, where somebody shows up on a website using your computer fingerprint. You look like this segment of people. So we're going to show you these kinds of products on the homepage because they are most likely to convert. And after you start clicking around, it's going to subtly change. We're going to show you different kinds of products and even change the menu in real time to match what you're looking for until you've been there for a couple of minutes and you're starting to learn the navigation system. And then, okay, we'll freeze it for you. And next time you come back, that will be your experience. That technology exists today. And it is unintrusive. It is not, I don't think of it as being using my personal data, although it totally is, but it's for my benefit. If you, on the other hand, like many of the texts that I received during this campaign season, make all kinds of assumptions about me, that annoys me. And I reject them all because they overstepped the boundary.
Right. And text messages, I got a whole ton of them myself. I just got a new phone. It's kind of a long story, but it's a Los Angeles number, and I'm already finding out, well, apparently Bridget used to have this number, and another guy used to have this number. Like, oh, okay, look at their buying patterns. That's interesting. And I'll throw it over to you. It reminds me of some of the early days of personalization where there were some pretty clumsy mistakes that were made, and you have to pay close attention to it. I think the key is to have policy, think through your policy, execute the policy, and then monitor and manage and watch. And that's the other the crazy thing about machine learning is like some of these technologies like Gong that you use for sales calls that monitor the sentiment, and we use Read AI, and it gives you this really interesting readout on what you've done. It's like, I mean, the boundaries of what is public, what is private are shaking right now. And we do have to be careful. I think it really does come down to policy and then adherence to policy and open-mindedness about changing policy. What do you think, Hayan?
Well, it's policy and it's also nuanced data usage. So think of the best customer experience you could possibly have. Call it Disney World. Snow White comes up to your, call it, disabled 3-year-old daughter, and it does exactly all the right things to make her feel like she's the most important person in the world, something that Disney World is great at. There's a lot of data being processed in some way around, call it, the disability or the language habits or what a 3-year-old girl is going to think about, that Snow White is thinking about when doing that. And that leads to a fantastic use of data and experience and, call it, workflow or the actual back and forth. However, if Snow White comes up to your daughter and says, oh, you went to the bathroom 6 times over the past day. Wow, things must really be working well. It's like, that's just creepy in all sorts of different ways. Like, you might have that data, but you should never use it like that. Right. Two completely different sets of things going on. And so, that's the practical aspect of having things like personally identifiable information and the right to be forgotten. It's very important to use the data in the right way, whether we're doing it as a human or as an AI agent going forward, where these types of understanding and capabilities need to be built into the agent to provide the right kind of experience.
Right. Wow. That's good stuff. Samuel, I'm going to throw it over to you to comment on that. Thought those are very, very good analyses by Hayan and the whole group here. And the key again is human oversight, managing the situations. I think good management is even still underappreciated, maybe because there's not enough of it, but good managers should have thick skin, should know how to calm down and not get all animated about something and just work through the process and stay focused. I think we need a lot of good managers to get through this next period of time. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me comment on a couple of things that are extremely important that has been talked about here. Why are we happy with Amazon? Because the data is theirs. And they have a belief, we have a belief that they're not going to mess with us. They're going to use it for our purposes. Yes, they're going to sell us stuff. They're going to try to convince us and everything else like that. It is not an internet-based data set. It is their own. Disney, one of my favorite, I have to say this for full disclosure, clients. Why do they call their staff members, their employees, cast members? This is management. They're putting an image in the people that work there, and their employees are called cast members. The people are called guests. Look at the relationship. These words mean something. You're coming into the park. You are a guest. The cast member is going to entertain you. That is their DNA. And they're surrounding their data sets with that understanding. So they're possibly not counting the number of bathroom visits. But they're looking at other characteristics, which are very important.